Good morning, everybody. This is Tina Lilly. I am the Grants Program Director with Georgia Council for the Arts, and I want to welcome everybody to our webinar today. I know we still have folks logging in, but we're going to go ahead and get started with some introductions and instructions. Give everybody a few more minutes to get logged on. And I want to make sure we have time to complete the material and answer whatever questions you have. So this webinar came about as a partnership between Georgia Council for the Arts and the Georgia Archives. It came from work that Georgia Council for the Arts has done with the Department of Georgia Tourism, traveling to communities around the state. And we've seen a lot of small museums and historical societies that have done incredible work in preserving their communities' stories and heritage and artifacts, but also had a lot of questions about what they could do as a small organization, usually all volunteer, to take care of those artifacts, to preserve them, to exhibit them, to tell the stories when they didn't have a lot of money and had a lot of community members as volunteers. So we contacted the Georgia Archives, and they graciously agreed to do the work and prepare this presentation with that type of information. So we want to thank them very much for the work that they've done to pull all of this together. We originally intended this to be a workshop that was going to be in person. It was going to be a full-day workshop and include lots of hands-on demonstrations, and so that the archive staff would be available to ask a lot of questions, or excuse me, answer a lot of questions. Obviously, because of COVID, this is something we couldn't do in person, so the decision was made to do this introductory webinar today. And hopefully in the future, we will be able to present some of these workshops in person in different parts of the state, so that those of you that are interested can learn more, can meet directly with the archive staff and ask questions and get hands-on help. So we will keep you in the loop of anything that we plan for the future. Today's webinar will be recorded. We'll send a link to each person that was registered. It will also be posted on the websites for Georgia Archives as well as Georgia Council for the Arts. So I want to thank my coworker, Alan Bell. He is our Arts Education Manager at Georgia Council for the Arts, and he is graciously handling the technical aspects of today's webinar, and we could not do this without him, so thank you very much, Alan. So a few housekeeping notes before we actually dive in. The presenters today will be pausing several times to answer any questions that you have. So if you have a question at any point, please type it into the Q&A box, which is on the left side of your screen in the middle. And we will pause and answer those at several points during the workshop. Now, I want to introduce, there will be two presenters today. You'll hear from Sigourney later on today, but we're going to start off with a presentation from Hendry Miller. And Hendry began working at the Georgia Archives in May of 2018, serving as collection manager since March of 2019. Originally from Barrow County, Hendry studied history at Valdosta State University and conducted graduate work at Florida State University, earning a PhD in 2017, focusing on American history, particularly the colonial and early American South. Now, before joining the Georgia Archives, Hendry worked as an archivist and reference manager at the State Archives of Florida. So I am going to turn it over to Hendry for the first part of our presentation. We will take a 5-minute break between the two portions, so roughly at 11 o'clock, but we will let you know when we get there. So thank you all for participating, and Hendry, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Tina, and thank you to all the participants who can be here. I hope everyone can hear me, and we're going to go ahead and get started. As Tina mentioned, I'm Hendry Miller. I've been working at the Georgia Archives since 2018, and before that I worked at the State Archives of Florida. So I've done a lot of different things working in the archives. And this presentation, we're going to try and touch on a lot of those. As Tina mentioned, we initially envisioned this as an all-day webinar, and most of the topics that we are going to discuss, we could probably spend several, multi-day classes just on each one of those aspects. So it is going to be sort of very big picture, and hopefully in the future we'll be able to get into some of the communities and meet individually with you all and have some more of those more specific all-day classes going on. And I apologize if there's any technical difficulties. We had a technology practice run yesterday, and I was just about to hit the wrong button on the computer, and Sigourney called me. So I do apologize. All technology errors are my fault. So getting into it. So what are archives? The word archives is interesting. It can be used in 3 different ways. Archives can refer to the permanently valuable records the permanently valuable records of people, organizations, or governments. It can include items like letters, accounts, minute books, photographs, anything that can convey information about the record's creator. Archives can also be the agency or the institution that is administering those records. So the Georgia Archives is the agency responsible for acquiring and preserving Georgia's state historical documents. And lastly, archives can be defined as the building that is holding those records. So it's sort of a word that is self-referential and defines itself. And the sentence, the archives are in the archives, is technically correct, if not a little clunky. I'll also apologize about any of my jokes that fall flat. Perhaps they're better suited to in person. So sorry for the archives humor. So the archives can be the records, the institution, or the building that is holding those records. Archives and libraries have a lot of different overlapping features, and as small cultural institutions, many of you may be responsible for administering a library collection and an original records collection. But let's take a second to sort of define the features of both. Libraries generally focus on collecting published material, so like books and periodicals. In libraries, you can often browse and retrieve items yourself. And library collections are organized by subject or genre. Multiple copies of library materials may exist, and lost or damaged items can generally be replaced. Frequently, libraries allow you to borrow materials, and libraries generally have lower security. Archives, on the other hand, focus on collecting unpublished materials, unique materials, so like records or letters. Archives are not self-service. You have to request materials from archive staff. Archival records kept organized by the creator of the records. We don't separate collections out based by topic. We keep the items together based on the creator of the records. Archives focus on collecting unique materials that are not easily replaced or not replaceable at all. You can generally not check materials out from an archive. You have to look at them in the facility, and archives usually have higher security. So, like I said, a lot of these functions may overlap. Libraries may have a special collections holding where the items that they have aren't replaceable, and archives may have a research library that is part of their facility. And as I mentioned, as small cultural institutions, you folks wear many hats. You may be responsible for administering a library collection, an archives collection, and maybe even an artifact collection for your museums and exhibits. But Sigourney and I are going to be focusing on the archives portion of things today. All right. So, biggest picture, the institutional mission and your collection scope. An institutional mission is a statement about how your facility operates, and connecting with the collection scope, which we'll talk a little bit more specifically about. It identifies the items that your institution is going to collect. It's what makes you, you. At its core, this is a statement that delineates your institution's primary and foundational objectives. It serves as the foundational statement of your institution's vision and mission. It may refer to other more specific policies, so like a collections development policy or a preservation policy, but it may not need to. It's telling everybody what your institution is about. In the ideal world, there would be a template that would be one size fits all. You just get a copy of the template and you could fill in your parts and it would work for everybody. But every institution is different. Not all things that would work for a big university collection could be applied to a county historical society or to a government agency. But what you want your institutional mission to consider is to have a clear declaration of your purpose, and it will help your institution focus its energy and resources. And some examples of institutional missions. So the Georgia Archives identifies, collects, provides access, and preserves Georgia's historical documents. We maintain records that protect your legal and property rights, as well as those of the state government and the counties. And there's a link where you can find out more about the Georgia Archives mission. And so another example, this is the Walter J. Brown Media Archives at part of the University of Georgia's special collections. The Brown Media Archives mission is to preserve, protect, and provide access to the moving image and sound materials that reflect the collective memory of broadcasting and the history of the state of Georgia and its people. And if you go to their website, you could scroll through and see more of their institutional mission and more about their collections. But this screen grab is just sort of the highlight, the main part of their mission. And lastly, a smaller institution, the South Georgia Archives at the Throttatiska Heritage Center, which is in Albany. They're dedicated to collecting and caring for the archives and artifacts that tell the story of Albany and Southwest Georgia's history. And then they tell you a little bit more about what they do to make sure those records are available and how they provide access to it. And it also gives you information. They're part of a larger institution with a larger mission, so that they're also serving their history and science museums. So those are just a few examples of some institutional missions from a variety of different repositories. So the next part is developing a collection scope or a collection development policy. This policy defines what an institution will accept and what it will exclude. And there's a lot of different ways that you could work on this. If most of you are in geography-based, it could be a regional focus collection development scope. So focusing on collecting records from the city or a county or a multi-county area. It could have a topical focus, so you might collect veterans papers or people with certain heritage. So if your community has a lot of folks with Zamundan ancestry, you might want to include that. And I don't know if anybody gets the reference to Zamunda coming to America. I was told that Wakanda might be more appropriate if we're using fictitious countries, but I just watched Coming to America, so that one was in my mind. And lastly, it could focus on a certain type of medium. Audio-visual specific collections like the Brown Media Archives. I see someone in the participant list has their hand raised. If they want to type a question into the Q&A, and we can get to that once we get done with this slide before we move on. And if anyone has questions, please feel free to type them in the Q&A, and then we'll get to them as we come to stopping points. So this collection scope or development policy lays out what do you collect and why. The items that you bring in should support your institutional mission, and you should make an effort not to have an overlapping collection with other nearby institutions. You don't want to be competing with the same types of materials. This policy should clearly lay out what you will accept and specifically identify items that you will not accept. So your institution is in Smith County. You focus on records from the Smith County and surrounding areas, and a person shows up with a shoebox full of business and family papers from Uncle Joe and Aunt Edna, and they live in Alaska and sell trinkets on the side of the road. And they want to donate this shoebox full of records to you. If Smith County's archives collects subarctic folk art, it might be a great fit, but if you're a small cultural institution in the South, this is going to be outside of your collection development policy. And so having this clearly laid out in that policy, you can speak with the donor and say, look, this is interesting, but it doesn't fit our collection policy, so you'll need to find another place for Uncle Joe and Aunt Edna's records. Your collection policy should also outline how you will receive materials and how the actual transfer of the records, the legal custody of the records, is going to be changed over to you. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but something that most institutions would generally say to avoid would be loan of materials, because if the loan is sort of an indefinite loan and your institution puts a lot of work into processing those records and making them available, and then a few years later a family or donor wants them back, if it's by the loan agreement, all the work you've done is sort of going out the door. So generally you want to tend to avoid loan agreements unless it's something that's really valuable or something that's going to be on a short-term display at your facility. Your collection development policy would probably want to include information about who makes the decisions to take things in. If it's a small institution and there's one person in charge of the library and archives, maybe it's their discretion to determine if things fit the collection development policy. Maybe it's a board of directors, maybe it's a collections committee of volunteers who work on it and say this does fit or this does not fit. But you'd want to outline that in a collection development policy. You may want to have your policy mention confidential or restricted materials. For private institutions, it's a little bit different than state or government agencies. We are obliged at the Georgia Archives to take in a lot of government records that do have confidential information or have restricted materials in them. And it's our duty to identify those and make sure that, we don't give away someone's information. And so as a small institution, you might be able to say, we will not take in records that have like bank account numbers on it. It's the donor's obligation to separate those materials out before donation. It's just something to think about. And lastly, as you're thinking about your collection development policy, when you agree to take something in, it's for the long haul. There may be a lot of time and resources that go into processing a collection, making it available for research. It may need specialized treatment if it's been damaged, and if it's a very large collection, having the ability to store the collection in an archival vault and also be able to take in new collections in the future are all kind of considerations that you would need to make when you're writing this and determining to take records in. And I'll pause for a second in case there's any questions that are going to come in.
Henry, this is Tina. We don't currently have any questions, but I'll just remind everybody, if you do have a question, type it into the Q&A box, and we will be glad to answer that the next time we pause.
Okay, thank you. All right, so here's a couple of quick examples, and sorry, I just tried to use the wrong button again. I think it worked that time accidentally, so it didn't crash anything, so we'll just keep going with it. A couple of collection policies. I was going to try and get a screen grab from our website, but there was just a lot of information. This is the Georgia Archives main collection policy. That only permanent state agency records are eligible for transfer to the archives. And then there's some instructions for the agencies on how to determine if the records are permanent or long-term temporary, or if they have to keep them in their agency. And then the next part, title to the records is transferred to the Georgia Archives in accordance with this code citation. And records that belong to the Georgia Archives do not leave our facility. So state agencies, if they have permanent records to send to us, they sign the records over to us. And then once they are here, we process them, and they do not leave the facility. Our main focus is state agency records. In the past, the Georgia Archives collected a lot more personal and family papers, and this is our collection policy for privately donated items. The Georgia Archives accepts donations of family and organization of papers and records that are closely associated with the state government. And so that's our focus. As you can read more in the rest of the policy, there are a lot of great archival repositories in the state of Georgia. We have a directory of historical organizations on our website that we update and maintain. And so it's sort of our goal that we keep like family papers and papers from a certain community as close to that community where people could use it and research with it. And I'll plug the directory. If any one of you are don't know if your institution is on the directory, you could find it on our homepage and then contact us at that email address, and we could add you to that directory. And we also have a note here, the last line, that the Georgia Archives does not accept genealogical research collections. It's something that we took in the past, but it's our policy now that these are most often, genealogical collections are very personal, so they might be very informative to a particular family or an extended family, but it's something that we don't really have the resources to store. And so we still get people offering to donate them to us, and we say, unfortunately, it's not something that we collect. And then oftentimes a person will say, well, it's all copies of records from your building. And that's sort of exactly the point. We already have a lot of those original records, so we don't want to be taking in copies of records that we've already got. And so what we do, we do offer to collect family vertical files. So once a person has done all their genealogical research, they can type up their findings and donate that to us, but we don't collect their entire collection. Here's another collection policy example. This is from the Roswell Historical Society. They have a little bit of their mission there. Turn the page here. They encourage you to consider donating your historical materials to Roswell Historical Society and the Roswell Research Library and Archives, where they will be preserved so that they can inform and inspire future generations. Before you donate, please contact this person, I'm sure the collections manager, to discuss donation options, procedures, and more of their collection development focus. So they sort of hint that if it's about Roswell in the area, they will take it, but they do have some more guidelines that they give to people and ask that people contact someone at their facility before just showing up with a box full of records and saying, here you go. All right. So the next part of the process, we're just going to do a quick run through. And like much of what we're talking about today, we could spend a lot of time talking about all of this, but we just have to get through what we can because of the circumstances. But the next part is appraisal, acquisition, and accessioning records. This is the way that you identify, get title to, and actually bring records into your facility. So appraisal is determining the informational value of a collection to see if it fits your collection scope. And please note that archival appraisal is different than monetary appraisal. If someone has something that they suspect is valuable and they just want you to tell them what it might be worth in an antiques market, this is not the same thing. And if someone wants monetary appraisal, you should direct that person to get an independent appraisal for that. Even if they still want to donate it to your facility and they need the tax write-off, it should still be an independent third party doing the monetary appraisal. A lot of things go into appraisal. Is there evidentiary value of the records, which means is there usefulness of the records to inform a researcher down the road? Does it tell us something about the creator of the records? When you're appraising records, you have to look at their physical condition. Is it going to need a lot of processing? Is it water damaged? Is it dirty? Is it infested with insects? Which, if it's in very poor condition, it may justify you saying, no, this doesn't fit with our collection. Is there a lot of it? Is your facility going to be able to handle the volume that's coming in? Is it on a unique technology medium? So if someone has a lot of old floppy disks, are you going to be able to get the information off of those floppy disks and provide access to it both now and 50 years in the future? And so that will it be accessible? So all of these things go into appraisal. But most importantly, anything that you appraise should fit your collection scope to make sure that you're bringing in records that support your institution. So once you've appraised the records and determined that it fits your collection scope, the next part of the process is acquisition. So this is seeking out, selecting, and obtaining records for your institution through transfer or donation from the records creator. So that's kind of a dry definition, but it's basically identifying the records and bringing those records in. For government agencies like us, we have, like I mentioned, a records management program with retention schedules that tells when records need to come to us and when they need to be kept by the agency. For smaller institutions, you may rely on people offering their records to you, or you may be able to approach people in the community about bringing those records in. But it's basically just identifying the records that you want to bring in. And then the last part of this process is the accessioning. And so this is the process of transferring legal and physical custody to your institution from the records creator. So a couple of things that go into accessioning. What is it that we're accessioning? You should kind of already know that from the appraisal and acquisition processes. But the next two parts are incredibly important. I got ahead of myself, excuse me. The next two parts are establishing physical and legal custody of the records. Physical custody is pretty straightforward. The records are in your facility, in your vault. The legal custody requires documentation that says that the donor is giving these records to you. It might be what's called a deed of gift, which would be a legal document, so you would want to think about all the different things that might go into that, identifying and making sure that the donors are the sole owners of the record, that there's not going to be another claim down the road, and just making sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed to make sure that you legally own these records once they're transferred. It's a good opportunity to mention copyright as well. With privately donated collections, the donor may give you physical and legal custody but retain copyright, either for a certain time period or indefinitely. And so people might be able to use the records to research, but they may not be able to, you may not be able to grant the ability to copy or publish those records without permission from the donor or their representative. So this establishing legal custody is really important. And you want to get it done early in the process. Oftentimes people, when they clean out someone's house, they say, oh, we found a bunch of letters, here you go, goodbye. If you don't have the opportunity to have them sign that legal transfer or deed of gift, it's something that you want to try and track down the donor and make sure that you clear up any ownership questions. And this process creates what we call accession records. So these are records about the transfer of other records. So it would be that deed of gift form that you have a donor sign over to you. You would want to keep an accession log in your facility saying what materials come in and give it a unique identifier in your library, your archives catalog. And you might want to create what's called a case file, which would include a copy of the deed of gift. It could include all of the correspondence between you and the donor, and it might include a list of the materials that are coming in. The donor may have provided you a list, like there's 5 boxes, this is what's in each box. That would be kept in this case file. All right, so if there are any questions, I'll pause for a second, take a sip of water, and give anybody a chance to type in a question.
Henry, this is Tina. We do have a question.
Okay.
One of our participants asked, what type of agency does monetary appraisals of archival books, furniture, or paperwork?
Okay. We have a couple of links on our website, and Sigourney and I are going to put together a a resources page to send out as well. There's the Antiquarian Booksellers Association, I believe, is one that does monetary appraisals. We have links on our website to a couple of different options for monetary appraisals. We actually haven't been asked for one in a while. It's probably connected with the COVID pandemic. But when we give information for people, we usually try to give them options of different people they can contact, or 2 different organizations with more people within them that they can contact. And we'll make sure to include that in our resources page.
Great. That is the only question right now.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the next part of the process is called arrangement and description. And this is establishing physical and intellectual control over the collections, so that you know what you've got and you know how you can locate it. So physical control is that the records are accessible and you can locate them, and intellectual control is knowing what you've got. So knowing what we have so you can tell researchers about it, but also so that if something goes missing, you know that you have a problem. All right, so arrangement is establishing the organization of materials and ensuring that they're in a proper containers so that researchers can use them. And it's not just arrangement within a collection of records that you've taken in, but how that collection fits to other parts of your larger holdings. There's 2 main ideas when you're thinking about arranging records to keep in mind, and that's provenance and original order. Provenance is a theory that says we respect the originator of the records. We respect where the records came from. So you do not want to intermingle records from different agencies or different donors, because the context of who created the record tells you a lot about both the records themselves and the people who created the records. And then a similar vein, you want to follow the original order of how the records came to your facility if you can. Once again, this tells us the context of the records, and it tells us a lot about the records creator, what was important to them. Why did they keep these records in this way? Now, a lot of times, especially with people's family papers or photographs, they may have been, oh, my grandmother kept all these letters and pictures in her desk drawer for the last 60 years, and she would rummage through them every once in a while. And now we've put them in a box, and there's no discernible order. So in that's in its situation where you would probably want to impose an order, maybe get letters to certain people together or arrange them by date. But if you can, you want to respect the order that the records were kept by their creators, because records in context can tell you a lot more information than just a letter by itself. And once again, the goal of arrangement is to make sure that the records are physically accessible. They're organized in boxes and folders, and that people can get access to them, whether they're in your institution or a researcher coming to you to be able to look at them. And how people know about the records is from the description process. So this is compiling the information about how their records are arranged and other characteristics so that you can convey to researchers what they can find, what informational value they can find in these records. You've probably gathered a good bit of this information in the appraisal and accessioning process and in the arrangement process. So your description should let the researchers know who created the records, what time period the records are covered, And you're going to create different things that like research guides or finding aids that would let people know how they can, the information from the records. So the broadest level of finding aid would be a repository guide. This is going to fit very closely with your institutional mission. So it's just, you might find records about Smith County in this institution. So it's very high level, not too specific. More specifically, you might have an inventory or a collection guide. So you got the Johnson family collection, and you could say in this collection there are letters from 4 generations of these family members. It dates from the late 1800s to the 1970s, and it focuses on the operation of the Johnson family farm and peanut mill. So it gives you an idea about the collection. You could also have subject or format guides. So subject guides would be all the records in the institution about a particular topic. So it might be about agriculture. It might be about veterans papers or people who served in the military. And it might be a format guide. You might have a specific guide to all the photographs in your collection. And it might be, the description might be as plain as just a listing of the folder headings in the boxes that you take in. So letters 1910 to 1915, letters 1915 to 1920, very straightforward. And it might be a collection guide and a series description. They often overlap. In this Georgia archives, government records we generally classify into series, and privately donated records we classify as collections. So the series description would have a lot of that same information. So who created the records, what years, what time period does it cover, what can a researcher expect to find in this collection. It may include index terms, and it may include references to other similar collections in the holdings. And like I say, the goal of description is so that the records become intellectually accessible. A staff member in the future or a researcher can look at the description work you've done and have a rough idea of what they can expect to find when they request records. And all of this is very important to knowing what you have, so that, like I said, if something turns up missing, that you know it's missing. If something isn't in a folder, it's effectively lost if you're not able to immediately locate it. It's not something that just sort of turns up again. So knowing what you have helps you a great deal if something is misplaced or you suspect it's misplaced. And like I say, I know that's a lot to cover. Are there any questions?
Yes, we do have a question. What software is recommended for organizing archives?
Oh, goodness. There are so many different ways that you could go about it. The easiest one would be really just a word processing document. It wouldn't necessarily go into a searchable database or a searchable catalog, but a standard word processing software like Microsoft Word, you could just type up the information and then either share it electronically with your researchers or put it in physical finding aids in your facility. The drawback to that is obviously people have to come in and thumb through the finding aids to find information, and that's where the archivist's institutional knowledge is really important. So if someone says, I'm looking for records that speak to family life in the 1950s, the archivist could say, okay, you can look at these 3 collections and here are the finding aids for them. So it's not as user-friendly where someone might be able to browse your catalog, but it's, most computers have word processing software on them already, and you can customize the format of your finding aids to however you want it. There are a lot of different specific softwares out there, some of them that are crowdsourced on the internet that you could play around with. We're actually trying to change our finding aid software right now, and it's not been a fun process, but once again, I'll admit that I am not a lover of technology, so it's taking me out of my comfort zone, definitely. And if anyone would like to email me to follow up more specifically, I'd be happy to answer questions that way as well.
Great. And we have a second question. Are you suggesting that we avoid temporary custody agreements and go straight to DOG?
For our experience at the Georgia Archives, yes. I would avoid the temporary custody unless it's something that your facility is comfortable with doing and has done a lot. So if you're taking in, if you're doing like an exhibit and you're going to take in materials from a different collection or a private donor for an exhibit, you could lay out those, the parameters of the temporary loan and know when the loan is going to end, so that there's a definitive end to it. But it's something that at the Georgia Archives we still deal with today. We have a lot of indefinite loans from the 1950s and 60s where a family said, we may want them back, but we'll sign it over to you and then we'll contact you later on down the road. And it puts your institution in a lurch of not knowing who the point of contact, if like a family member has passed away, not knowing what to do with the records. And there's you just want to make sure that you have the custody of the records so that you can let people use them, and you don't want any questions or challenges to your custody of the records down the road, especially if you put in a lot of effort into putting the records in archival boxes and folders, and a lot of time and effort in arranging the records.
Great. So those are the only questions right now.
Okay, thank you. And it's every archivist has the horror story of the indefinite loan gone wrong. So I think it's generally why we try to tend to avoid them. But thank you for those questions. So access policy. So access in this sense is the ability to locate and use information from archival collections. So being able to use the records. When you're creating an access policy, your institution has a responsibility to the researcher, but also to the records. You want people to be able to use the records, but something we didn't really talk about, but donor agreements, if the donor says, we want to keep this record closed for 5 years after donation, and then people can use it, you have a responsibility to the donor and to the records to make them available as soon as they can, but not before it. And when thinking about your access policy, we recommend going back. This is the Society of American Archivists and the American Library Association's joint statement on access. There's a lot of different points to this. There's 7 big points, but there are 2 that we'll really focus on. It's the responsibility of the institution to provide equal terms of access. And that means that you're not giving preferential treatment to one group of researchers over the other, that everything is uniform. So for a government archives, once records come here, they're pretty wide open so long as we don't have to separate confidential information. Corporate archives, or like a business archives, they might have an access policy that says only people from the finance department can see the financial archives. So it doesn't have to be that it's universal. It just has to be equal terms of access. And so, if a donor said, no access for 5 years. You couldn't give it to well, this person researches all the time, so we'll go ahead and let them take a look at it. You have to provide equal terms of access. And the other one that we like to focus on is fees and services. Ideally, you would be able to make your collections available without charging money, so it's not a pay-to-play situation. You may have copy and photocopy fees, but you would just want to make sure that the researchers know that ahead of time. And there's more points to it, but generally the idea of this joint statement on access and what you should focus on in your policy is equal terms of access, not giving one type of researcher special preference over others. When writing an access policy, here are several things to consider that you would include in it. Who's giving you authority? So, the Georgia Archives Authority is the Georgia Records Act, and you would want to include that in your access policy. Who can use the records? What are the concerns for privacy or any restrictions in the records? It may lay out all of the reading room procedures. It may just give a reference to a more specific reading room policy. It would outline any fees associated with copying the records. It may mention security features or emergency procedures for people coming to your facility. So the key is that it should be a written and formal policy, and it should be consistent but circumstantially flexible. And so what I mean by that is here at the Georgia Archives, we have a lot of records from the 1800s that have been microfilmed as a way of making them a little bit more accessible to researchers and also to preserve the life of the original record so that people aren't handling a fragile volume or a fragile book. And so our policy is that microfilm records, if there's a copy of a record on microfilm, that's the first use. Patrons need to use that before pulling the original. And where our policy is flexible is if the microfilm is damaged or illegible, then we'll consider pulling the original record. So that's an example of this access policy being flexible but consistent. Okay, so I've got a few slides to get through here. I'll try and get everybody to their coffee break before too much longer. Reading room procedures and reference services. In many ways, having people use the records is a culmination of all of your archival work. You're keeping these records and you're preserving the information the records hold so that people can use it now and in the future. And so you're going to want to try and provide three main things for reference services and reading room procedures. A suitable environment for research, so a designated area, which we'll talk about. Information about the holdings, which would be those, the finding aids that we talked about earlier, the descriptive material that you've already done. And then lastly, information from the holdings. That's actually getting the researchers connected to the records and that they can look at them. So having your research room, you want to have a designated area that's set aside specifically for archival research. It may be difficult if you have a smaller institution that shares research space with like your library collection, but you may want to have a specific table designated as the archives records table. You want this part to be like away from windows because light can damage records. Sigourney will talk more about that. And you want to have the researchers sign in and out so that you'll know who's coming in the research room. You should clearly list items that are going to be restricted and items that are going to be allowed in the research room. So restricted items could be anything that could potentially damage the records. Food, drink, You don't want people bringing in their lunch with their Cheetos and snacking on that while they're looking at the records. You want to restrict people bringing in notebooks, especially large notebooks that can close up, pens, Post-it notes, or tape, anything that can be applied to the records, any bags or large jackets. Bags and large jackets could be used to conceal records if someone, accidentally mixed them up with their notes and just put everything in their bag, or if someone was intentionally trying to leave with your records. But also, people might put their bag on the table and set their bag on top of the records or their jacket on top of the records, which could damage them. So you want to restrict those type of items. The items that you would consider to allow would be a laptop, so people could take electronic notes, cameras or smartphones if you're going to allow people to photograph the records without flash, of course. You might allow people to bring in pencils, and then a sweater or a light jacket. Ideally, archives research rooms should be a little bit on the chillier end, and so you do have to recognize some things may be necessary for the patron's comfort. In your research room, you might want to consider providing pencils or note paper for the researcher. This just gives you a little bit more control, and we use a different color note paper than any of the paper that a researcher might expect. So we can see that if someone has white paper and they're trying to head out of our reading room, we can say, I think you might have accidentally scooped up some of the wrong things here. And you can designate seating in the research area just so that you're able to keep an eye on the patrons using the records. Once again, archives are not self-serve. You may need to pull the items for the researcher, or you will need to pull the items for the researcher. They're not having access to your vault, and you may want to limit the number of items that a researcher can have at a time. So maybe like 4 boxes from the vault at a time, so that if something gets misplaced, there's only a few different other boxes that might have been misplaced in. You're going to want to supervise the researchers and offer suggestions of other related records. So that's one of the reasons you want to supervise them, but also to make sure that they're not bending the pages or writing on the pages. So this idea of felt or perceived security. I've got 2 more slides to get through, and I'm going to go through them sort of quick, and they overlap with what Sigourney is going to speak about to a great deal. So there will be more of that in the preservation part of this webinar, and I'll take a brief minute for any questions at the end before our break. So preservation is a variety of activities and policies that are designed to prolong the usable life of archival materials. So rather than more specific things that you might think of as preservation, which we'll talk about in a second, it's all the different things that go into making sure that that item's life, usable life, is as long as possible. So security, it's the things as simple as having people sign in and out of the research room, supervising people when they're using the records, having a closed stack area. It's not specifically having security staff. It's just making sure that people know that when they're using the records that they're being supervised, just to make sure that nobody gets curious about what would happen if I tried to take this sheet of paper, this record with me. Environmental monitoring. Sigourney will talk more about this, but the goal is to have constant temperature and humidity, and Sigourney will give you more specifics about the ideal temperature and humidity ranges. Having appropriate storage and housing, so having acid-free folders, acid-free records storage boxes, making sure that the boxes are appropriately filled. The records aren't the boxes aren't underfilled, and the folders slouching over, bending the records, and having appropriate vault storage areas with sturdy shelving, having the shelving elevated off the floor so in case there's a flood that the records aren't sitting in water, things like that. Care and handling policies. This is important for staff as well as researchers, making sure that people aren't rough with the records or tearing the records if they're turning pages, instructing researchers to actually hold the record as little as possible. We tell people to lay the folder flat on the table and to just turn one page at a time so that they're not touching the records more often than necessary. And we've talked about this when supervising people using the collection and having a policy to check after they've used it. So this could be just saying, did you find everything you were looking for? Did anything seem like it was out of place? And then maybe after the patron leaves, just peek in the boxes to make sure that there's not any records that are sticking up taller than the folder that might get bent by the box lid. All right, so the last slide, preservation specifically. Preservation, as I've sort of said, is all the small things that you can do to prevent damage and wear to prolong the life of an item. Conservation usually requires more specialized treatment. And so there's sort of three more specific things with preservation. It's protecting the records. We've already been talking about it. Making sure that they're in proper folders and boxes, removing any rusty fasteners, so old paper clips if you can, replacing boxes that might be collapsing for whatever reason. So that's protecting the records. Preservation reformatting. This would be something like if you have newspaper clippings. Newsprint is inherently acidic, so it sort of destroys itself. But the information from that newspaper clipping is still important. So you might consider copying that newspaper clipping onto acid-free paper so that the information stays. You can, do things to try and slow down the spread of that newsprint eating itself. But if you have that user copy onto acid-free paper, the information is preserved. And a lot of people think of digitization when they think of preservation reformatting, but digitization also requires that the technology is going to be constant in the short term, medium term, and long term. So a lot really goes into a digitization program, and generally it may be more of a short-term reformatting. And lastly is specific conservation treatment. And this is something that we would advise unless you are a trained conservator. You're going to want to consult with an outside person to handle the treatment of those records. Oftentimes, if you've identified that there's a problem, that it's deteriorating, but you're not qualified to make any conservation treatments, it's better to do nothing than to attempt a conservation treatment without proper training. And I'm sorry I went through these last slides a little quickly, but here's the resources page, and Sigourney will have more that we'll send out. And if there's any questions before our short break, I'll be happy to answer them now.
Great. Henry, we have one question. Regarding software, what database is best? What do you use?
We are transitioning from an older software called Archon to a newer database software called ArchiveSpace. There's a lot of different options with ArchiveSpace, and there's different companies that can help you get it set up. If you're bold or technologically inclined, there's a lot of ways you can set it up yourself. That's the one that the Georgia Archives we're currently transitioning to, but there's a lot of them out there. And it really does require more of a technological mindset to get behind it. But if that's something you're capable of, there's a large user community that sort of helps people work through problems they might be experiencing with it. So it's called Archive Space.
Great. Second question, any particular manuscript preservation resources you might be able to suggest for small museums?
I'm going to defer to Sigourney for that. She may cover that in her presentation, but that is a lot more in her wheelhouse than mine, and that will definitely be in the resources that we can send out.
Great. Yeah, to the person who asked that question, if you have questions after Sigourney's presentation, please ask that question again. So thank you, Hendry. That was really, really informative. And okay, we're going to get started with the second part of our presentation, which will be presented by Sigourney Smuts from the Georgia Archives. Originally from Cape Town, South Africa, Sigourney has been the conservator for the Georgia Archives since February 2019. She previously worked in Philadelphia as the National Endowment for the Arts Paper Conservation Fellow at the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts, and at the Better Image Photo Conservation Studio in New Jersey. She was previously employed as the conservator for the University of Cape Town Special Collections Library and as a book and paper conservator in private practice, also in Cape Town. Sigourney received her BA in Fine Art, specializing in sculpture, from the University of Cape Town before completing an MA in Conservation of Fine Art, specializing in paper conservation, from Northumbria University in the United Kingdom. So I am going to now turn it over to Sigourney.
Thank you, Tina, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. As Tina said, I'm Sigourney Smuts. I'm the conservator here at the Archives. For clarification before we begin, this is a very brief overview of preservation concepts and ideas. As previously discussed, this was supposed to be an all-day in-person workshop. However, because of current circumstances, we will have to condense everything. Also, so you know, I will be discussing some scientific concepts through this. You don't need to understand these in detail, rather focus on the recommendations if you are confused. So, firstly, what is preservation? There can be a lot of confusion around the concepts of preservation and the terminology used. So we're going to first start with the scope of what preservation is. Preservation is the term that describes the high-level umbrella concepts behind looking after collection items. Preservation is defined as the protection of cultural property through activities that minimize chemical and physical deterioration and damage, as well as prevent loss of informational content. The primary goal of preservation is to preserve the existence of cultural property. Under preservation, there are two arms of it, which is preventative conservation and interventive conservation. Preventative conservation, which is sometimes referred to as preventative care, is the mitigation of deterioration and damage to cultural property through the formulation and implementation of policies and procedures for the following: appropriate environmental conditions, handling and maintenance procedures for storage, exhibition, packing, transport, and use, integrated pest management, emergency preparedness and response, and reformatting and duplication. So these are concepts that work on the environment around an object rather than the object itself. Under interventive conservation, where you're working on specific items, there's conservation, which is the profession devoted to the preservation of cultural property for the future. Conservation activities include examination, documentation, treatment, preventative care, supported by research and education. Restoration is the treatment procedures intended to return cultural property to a known or assumed state, often through the addition of non-original material. A lot of the confusion around these terms comes from the fact that as a profession we used to be called restorers and conducted restoration. However, there's been a shift away from restoration in the past couple of decades and more towards conservation, so that we can preserve as much of the original items as possible and focus on the integrity of the items. An easy way to understand these concepts is to think of it like healthcare, where preservation is the general concept of healthcare, and you can see preventative conservation under this metaphor as your lifestyle choices to preserve your health. So this would be things like what you eat and how often you exercise and those activities. Interventive conservation could be seen as going to a doctor if you needed specific help with an ailment. So conservation would be if you needed to have surgery or somebody needed to set a broken leg. Well, restoration would be the more cosmetic ideas, such as getting your teeth straightened. All these various strategies work together, and it's quite often that there will be a combination of preventative and interventive conservation as appropriate and as when it is needed. In this webinar, we'll be focusing on the preventative conservation side of preservation. Preservation activities include environmental control, proper storage and housing, proper care and handling, policies and procedures, security, integrated pest management and housekeeping, reformatting and digitization, conservation treatment and in-house repair, replacement and disaster planning. In this webinar, we'll be focusing on the items with the red asterisk next to them. Preservation activities aim to provide the greatest long-term benefits to the largest number of collection items. Some preservation activities will be more or less important or feasible depending on your type of institution, your collection, and the available resources. Certain factors may be unavoidable, such as your building, and this will need to be worked with or worked around. It is very important that you understand the whole picture when you create your preservation program, as well as advocate for necessary changes that may be needed. Do we have any questions at this point?
No questions yet.
Fantastic. So we're going to start with describing some of the degradation factors that will affect your items. These can be internal or external factors. External factors are more controllable, and you can often mitigate these factors. Internal factors, which are called inherent vice, are far more difficult to work with. These are the factors which come from the actual materials and methods that created the items, so you can't remove them or change them. So these are less controllable. They need to be worked with. Quite often you may need to call in a professional conservator for treatments. And just to make life a little bit more confusing, external factors can exacerbate the internal factors and make items degrade faster. In this talk, I won't be getting into object materiality, but it's important that you take some time to research the materials that create your collection items and ensure that you know what you're working with and you're making the right decision for that specific type of material. Both internal and external factors can be chemical or physical. I'm going to start with describing, in terms of external factors, the environment. Besides inherent vice, the environment will have the largest effect on your collection and its longevity. While it's important to control the environment, it's also very important to know what your environment is doing so you can respond to this. So monitoring is also incredibly important. As I said, I'll be getting into some scientific terminology and concepts. If you don't understand them, I will try explain them, but ultimately it's mostly important that you focus on the recommended guidelines. I'm going to start with light as one of the environmental factors. What we know of as light exists on the electromagnetic spectrum, which is wavelengths of radiation, including radio waves, such as your TV and radio, infrared radiation, visible light, what we see, ultraviolet radiation, X-rays, gamma rays, etc. Different types of light will emit different wavelengths, with sunlight emitting the full spectrum of wavelengths. Light can cause both physical degradation and chemical degradation. Physical degradation can be caused by expansion or contraction as items heat up or are exposed to the light. This can cause desiccation as well, where something dries out. Chemical degradation is called photochemical degradation in this instance. Infrared light imparts heat, which can then cause that desiccation described. So when you stand out in the sun and you feel the warmth of the sun, what you're feeling is the infrared light that is coming from the sun. Ultraviolet light is more damaging. This is because light energy is absorbed by molecules and this increases the rate of reactions. So any chemical degradation is therefore happening much faster. This is especially true with organic materials such as paper. The two pictures you're seeing on the side, the top one shows different types of light and how they fit onto that spectrum, with the yellow bar showing sunlight, which you can see has the full wavelength radiation, and then you can see that white emitting LEDs has a much lower and less degradative properties, and that is the blue line. So as far as possible, LEDs are very appropriate. The bottom picture you're seeing is where the image has darkened to that dark brown. That is because the border was protected by a window mat, and that window image was exposed to light, and that is the effect that light can have on paper. So you can see it can be damaging. Light damage is cumulative over an object's lifetime. So if it is exposed to light, it's not a one-off event. Every time it is exposed to light, it will add up and affect the longevity of your item. For this reason, you don't want to have any direct sunlight. As we said, this emits the full spectrum of wavelengths, and you want to avoid that as far as possible. You can reduce light damage by either turning lights off or covering items or putting them in enclosures when they are not in use. As far as possible, you want to reduce or remove UV light. This can be done by either using lighting such as LEDs, which do not emit UV light, or you can put UV light filtering screens onto windows and over light fittings. You want to also reduce visible light as much as possible, especially for exhibits, because they will be exposed to light for a longer period of time. And you want to limit exhibition items for a limited duration so they're not exposed too long. Visible light can be measured with a light meter, even something as simple as those that are used for photography. Do we have any questions regarding light at this point?
Yes, a question about if you have a paper item that's on exhibit, do you recommend making a copy of that item and displaying the copy?
That is a great workaround, and it is often recommended that if you have items, especially if they are on permanent exhibit, that you can create a facsimile copy that is out on display, and then it doesn't matter what damage happens to it, you can create another facsimile as it degrades over time, and therefore you can protect the original.
Okay, great. That is the only question right now.
Thank you. The next factor we're going to discuss is temperature. Temperature is defined as a measure of the average kinetic energy of the particles in an object. Again, this can be both physical and chemically degradative. The physical degradation can be due to expansion in certain materials, such as metals, which expand when they heat up. If something heats up, it can melt or soften materials, such as plastics, waxes, and soft metals. And if it's heated up, it can also desiccate or dehydrate organic materials, such as paper. One thing you need to remember is that different items expand and contract at different rates, so mixed materials are especially sensitive to physical degradation. Chemical degradation is caused due to that increase in the kinetic energy. So the same way that light excites the molecules so they move faster and it increases the rate of reaction, the same thing happens with temperature. But you can use this in your favor because if you lower the temperature, you will therefore slow down chemical reactions that cause degradation. Related to temperature is relative humidity. Relative humidity is defined as the amount of water vapor in the air expressed as a percentage of the maximum amount that the air could hold at a given temperature. High relative humidity increases the rate of deterioration, and it's also a big risk of mold, which is the picture you're seeing at the bottom. Low relative humidity can cause desiccation, cracking, and embrittlement. Organic materials will absorb or release moisture to slowly come to equilibrium with its surrounding air, and different materials will equilibrate at different rates, which can cause damage. Again, that's the expansion and contraction factors. Fluctuating relative humidity and temperature is the most damaging. A way to think about this is if you take a paper clip and you bend it back and you keep doing that, eventually it will snap. That same process happens within materials as they slowly expand and contract with changing temperature and relative humidity. So for this reason, you want to limit fluctuations as far as possible. Moisture from the air can also drive chemical reactions such as hydrolysis. As I said, there's a relationship between temperature and relative humidity. As you saw from the definition of relative humidity, it is defined as the amount of water vapor that the air can hold at a given temperature. Warm air holds more moisture than cold air, so if you change the temperature without changing the moisture content, you are going to change the relative humidity. The graph you are seeing here is if we have the same amount of moisture in the same confined space and all we do is change the temperature, you could see that the air capacity, which is the yellow part of the bar graph, expands or contracts. So the same amount of moisture at 40 degrees Fahrenheit, which would be 100% humidity, at 85 degrees Fahrenheit may be 20% humidity. So you always want to consider the two together. A good way to think about this, because I know this is a difficult concept to grasp, is to think of a glass of water on a hot day. You know, if you see a cold glass of water, you'll get that condensation on the outside of the glass. The reason that is happening is that the cold glass is cooling down the air around the glass, and the air can't hold that moisture anymore, so it's dropping out and attaching to the glass. So that is what causes condensation. The guidelines for temperature and humidity are a little tricky sometimes, especially if you have mixed storage, and they can have different requirements depending on the type of materials that you're storing. In general, first, before I get onto that, as I said before, you want to make sure that you maintain the temperature and humidity as low as possible within given ranges while minimizing the fluctuations. So what this means, especially for institutions that don't have a lot of money or the building is not the best quality, is if you can't hit the lower levels, rather hit the higher levels while minimizing the fluctuation. So in general, relative humidity should be between 30 and 50%. In general, temperature should be between 35 degrees Fahrenheit to 65 degrees Fahrenheit, with a maximum of 70 degrees Fahrenheit for combined stacks and research areas. So with the minimizing fluctuations, if you don't have the best building or your HVAC system isn't particularly good, rather hit 50% relative humidity at 65 degrees Fahrenheit and maintain that level than strive to hit 30% and just not be able to meet it. You also want to limit those daily fluctuations. So you want to limit that to 2 degrees Fahrenheit and 3% relative humidity as far as possible. And you want to limit your maximum monthly drift to 3 degrees Fahrenheit and 3% relative humidity. That means that the drift from, if at the first of the month it is 60 degrees Fahrenheit, at the end of the month you want it to be at most 63 degrees Fahrenheit. You can monitor these with data loggers. Examples of this are hobos or PEMs, which are recording data loggers, and the picture you see is a hobo data logger. These are better than snapshot data loggers such as a thermometer, as you get the full picture of what's happening in the building even when you're not there. Do we have any questions regarding temperature and relative humidity?
Well, we have a question going back to light.
Sure.
A question, the building where we exhibit our artifacts has fluorescent lights. It would be expensive to switch to different lights. Is there anything we can do, such as a filter, to use with the lights that we have?
You can get, for those fluorescent tubes, you can get tubes of UV filters that you put over the lights that then block the UV light. If possible, you could dim the lights and make sure that you turn the lights off when the items are not on display or there are not any people in that area, just again to limit that cumulative damage.
Okay, that's the only question right now.
And the last thing we'll discuss with the environment is pollutants. Pollutants can be particulate or gaseous. Particulate pollutants can be hair and skin cells, soot, fibers, pollen, metals, and other organic and inorganic materials. These can be abrasive. They are very often acidic and hygroscopic, which means they absorb moisture from the air. They can react with moisture to increase chemical deterioration. They can also attract insects, as a lot of those particulates are food for insects. And these can be a substrate that mold can grow off of, which is especially problematic because it absorbs moisture, so it can easily grow mold if the relative humidity is too high. Gaseous pollutants can be acids, ammonium, formaldehyde, peroxides, ozone, and they are often given off by combustion, heavy machinery, cleaning products, and building and furniture materials. These can cause chemical damage. They can mix with water in the air to form acids in or on your materials, such as sulfuric acid. And they can also mix with water in the atmosphere to create acid rain, which can damage buildings and outside objects, if you have a sculpture garden, for example. Urban areas are more at risk of high pollutant levels, and often this is just unavoidable. This is the world we now live in. You want to try reduce pollutants as far as possible using filtration, and you can work with your HVAC vendor to determine the best filtration for your needs and circumstances. For us at the archives, we are on the flight path to the airport, and as you know, the Atlanta airport is probably the busiest in the world, so we have incredibly high filtration just to deal with that pollution. Pollutants can also be cumulative, and so you need to take more care of the filtration of your storage areas to ensure that it doesn't build up in those areas too much. Any last questions around pollution and pollutants?
No, it doesn't look like we have any questions so far.
Fantastic. Okay, we're going to move on from the environment and discuss handling. This is another big external degradation factor, and it's very easy to cause a lot of damage by inappropriate handling, as well as to prevent damage just by ensuring that you do handle items correctly. Handling can result in severe physical damage, such as tears, folds and creases, fractures, losses, scratches, and damage or loss of your media. It can also cause staining, such as smudge marks, spills if it's near items, like if you have food or beverages nearby, and you can leave fingerprints on items. Poor handling can also cause chemical damage, such as oil stains, the oils on your hands transferring to collection items, and that can damage and stain over time. As far as possible, we no longer recommend the use of gloves, especially those stereotypical white cotton gloves for handling items. The reason behind this is if you wear gloves, there's a loss of sensitivity and dexterity, so you may accidentally damage something as you turn it over or try to turn the page. You can also transfer contaminants such as mold if you're handling multiple items with the same pair of gloves. The gloves can catch on things, so catch on the corners of an item and potentially tear or damage it. Those white cotton gloves can transfer lint, as well as they can be very abrasive and therefore damage your items. For this reason, we recommend that you handle items with clean, dry hands. You don't want to use any hand sanitizers or lotions. This is especially important now that we're going through this pandemic and hand sanitizers are very popular. They have done studies on hand sanitizers and their effect on paper-based materials, and they found that especially the alcohol-based hand sanitizers will leave a residue on your hands that will transfer to those items, and that will locally degrade those items. So you don't want to use any hand sanitizers when you are handling items. You also want to frequently wash your hands to remove any oils that build up on your skin. There are sometimes occasions where you may need to wear gloves, and the only type of gloves that are appropriate are nitrile gloves. This is because they are much more thin, so there's less loss of sensitivity and dexterity. They're also chemically resistant, so this protects your health when handling certain items, and they are disposable, so you can limit cross-contamination. It's also important that you only handle items as much as necessary. Every time you handle something, you increase the risk of it being damaged. As I said, sometimes you do need to wear gloves. The instances of this are for any photographic items or negatives. You can accidentally leave fingerprints on the gelatin of your photograph, which is now permanent in it. Same for gilded items and metals and glass with smooth surfaces. Again, you can accidentally leave fingerprints, and the oils from your hands, even that small amount from washing your hands that's left in your hands, can transfer and cause rusting or pitting of those items. There may be sensitive media. You may have something like a chalk pastel or charcoal drawing, and your fingers could pick that media up, so gloves will prevent that happening. Those first 4 bullet points are to protect the item from you. However, if you're handling any potentially hazardous items, you want to wear gloves to protect you from the item. This includes mold-infected items as well as taxidermy. If you're in doubt, rather err on the side of caution and wear gloves to be safe. So when you're handling items, you want to make sure that you carry them with both hands so they're well supported. Even if it's small or light and you can carry it with one hand, rather use both hands to be safe. If you are moving any large or heavy items, rather get a second person or more to assist you to ensure that you can watch all the corners of it and it doesn't hit any door frames, as well as the fact that you don't accidentally drop it. And you want to try support items from below with a secondary support. This may just be your hand under the item, or you could use a piece of cardboard for large pieces of paper or maps. You don't want to hold items by any corners or projecting elements that may snap off, and you want to be careful that you don't rub or abrade the surface of the media. Before you pick up an item, it's very important that you have a plan. You don't want to pick something up and suddenly move it someplace else and find that you don't have any place to put it down, or that you're hit by any obstacles on your path, which can then accidentally cause damage. Remember, every time you pick something up, you're putting it at risk of damage. So you want to know where it will be put down on the other end before you pick it up. You want to ensure that that landing surface is clean, dry, and there's enough space to fully support the item. You want to know what your travel route is and clear the path before you pick up the item. So this may mean propping open doors, or if necessary, you could have a second person available to open your doors as you move through the building. And for large or unwieldy items, you could use a trolley or something to support the item. Are there any questions regarding handling?
We do have a few questions. Okay. Several old taxidermied animals have made their way into our vault with works of art on paper, canvas, and fabrics. Should I recommend they be stored elsewhere?
The taxidermy items don't necessarily need to be stored elsewhere. The main reason we are cautious about handling them and having people wear gloves is that it was very common for those items to be treated with certain toxic chemicals to prevent pest infestation. So if you don't know the life and the history of that item, it may have been treated with one of those hazardous chemicals, and by touching it, you may then touch your face or something else, and you may therefore become exposed to that and hurt your health. So that's the real reason why those items need to be handled with gloves.
Okay. And we have a second question. Are items such as very old letters safely scanned?
You can safely scan them. The one thing to consider is every time you scan them, you're using quite a bright light to do the scanning. So you want to ensure that you do good quality scans originally, and so you don't have to scan them multiple times. Rather get a good quality scan once, and it's just a short exposure to light, and then that's it. If you have items that are folded, you may want to think carefully about how you scan them so you don't crush them in a flatbed scanner. Especially with things like books that don't open easily, you don't want to scan those in a flatbed where you can crack the spine by pushing it down onto the surface. So for something like that, you may want to rather photograph those items face up.
Okay, those are all the questions right now.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to storage. Henry touched briefly onto some of these concepts. So I'm going to get a little bit more into the specifics of storage. Storage can include storage furniture, such as shelving, which could be open shelving or compact shelving, cabinets, as well as display items, such as frames and display cabinets. And you may also then have item-level storage, such as boxes, folders, sleeves, and enclosures. And you'll often find that these all work together, that an item will go into a folder, which will go into a box that will then sit on a shelf. The storage design and materials can protect or contribute to both chemical and physical deterioration. Proper storage can reduce physical damage from handling or while it's in storage. It can reduce deterioration from light damage. If it's in a box, it's obviously not going to be exposed to light. It can limit the fluctuations from relative humidity. That is because storage enclosures create a microclimate, and this will slow the equilibration to the surrounding environment. So if you have a building or a vault where you can't control the relative humidity that well, storage is then incredibly important. They can also protect from chemical damage from external materials and inherent vice. What is appropriate storage will depend again on your type of materials, so it's important that you know what your materials are when selecting your storage materials. And it's important that the materials closest to the items are of as good quality as you can. That is because they'll have the greatest effect on those items. Storage furniture can cause both physical and chemical damage. The physical damage can be distortions, wear and tear, and broken bindings on books. And the chemical damage can be due to the furniture materials, coatings, and adhesives used. So for your things you do want to do, you want to make sure that your storage is strong enough to support the weight of your collective items. This is especially important for shelving. You also want to make sure that it fully supports the dimensions of your items so they're not going over the edge or falling off something that may therefore be damaged. As far as possible, you want to use powder-coated steel, anodized aluminum, or chrome-plated open wire shelving. However, the open wire shelving is only appropriate for box storage as it can leave an impression on your items. And you want to ensure that all shelving and items are at least 4 inches off the floor. This is because if there's an accidental flood or something, your items won't get wet. You don't want to have any storage furniture that's rough or abrasive that can damage your items, or to have projections or sharp edges. You also want to be careful that you don't overcrowd or pack your items in too tight so that they can then damage each other. This can be an additional problem, especially with library materials. If they're on a shelf packed too tight, as you're trying to take it off the shelf, you may tear the spine if it's too tight. As far as possible, you want to avoid storage furniture made out of hardwood or wood composites. However, I know that a lot of that material is already in a lot of storage spaces. So in those cases, try use a barrier layer, and this could be something as simple as a sheet of plastic on your shelf that the item then sits on top of. That is because that type of storage furniture can release chemicals that can damage your items. So I'm now going to get on to item-specific materials, which would be enclosures. This can be a little tricky when you're trying to find appropriate enclosures because there's no standardized terminology for how they refer to materials, and things such as archival or museum quality are often used just for marketing purposes and don't necessarily mean they are good quality. So it's always important to look at the specifications of those materials when you buy them. You'll find terms such as acid-free or acid-neutral. This is one that can be a little tricky. While it is a good term, what it really means is that the item was pH 7 to 7.5 at the time of manufacture. However, this type of material can become acidic over time depending on what it is made up of, so what the actual fiber content is of that folder. You'll also see buffered or alkaline buffered. This means that it contains an alkaline substance that absorbs and neutralizes acids to a certain degree. So that's a good thing to find in your materials, is if it's acid-free and buffered. Lignin is a component of cellulose, which makes up paper. Lignin is naturally incredibly acidic, and it darkens over time. So you can get folders and boxes that are lignin-free or low lignin, which means that they have had that lignin removed. Cotton or linen rag is paper that is made from cotton or linen fibers. This is much better quality as it is naturally acid-free. However, it's also quite commonly much more expensive. Alpha cellulose is wood pulp paper that has had the lignin removed. So it is very similar to that lignin-free or low lignin paper. So as far as possible, you want to try get folders or boxes that are acid-free, buffered, lignin-free, and alpha cellulose. So the recommendations are that you use appropriate paper folders for what your materials are. You can use plastic sleeves. However, you want to make sure that the plastic is either polyester, polypropylene, or polyethylene. All the other plastics have had additives added to either make them more flexible or have different working properties. These additional materials can release chemicals that can damage your items. Polyester, polypropylene, and polyethylene have no additives. That is all it is, so it won't degrade over time. You also want to ensure that your boxes have that they are sturdy and with tight-fitting lids. This is because when you pick up your box, you don't want the bottom to fall out and therefore damage your items. And by having tight-fitting lids, you can limit both light and pollution exposure. You never want to use anything that sticks by itself. These things will degrade over time and cause incredible damage, as you can see in that photo of how the tape is degraded on that document. This includes any type of tape. I don't care if it says it's archival, it will degrade. As well as post-it notes. These all will release chemicals that can slowly degrade over time. And a lot of this damage can be irreversible. You also don't want to use any metal fasteners such as paper clips or staples. These can rust, and that rust can cause damage, and they can also cause physical damage such as creases and tears. Rubber bands will slowly lose their plasticizers and become tacky, and then they will seep into your collection items, and then as they degrade further, they can become brittle and rigid, and that can be very damaging. As much as I said you can use plastic sleeves, you don't want to use them with any friable media, such as pastels, soft pencil, or charcoal. They will have a bit of a static electric charge, and that can damage those items. And again, you want to make sure that you don't overstuff folders or boxes that can then damage them over time. Exhibits are also problematic because while it's great that the public can get to see your materials, they put your objects at more risk of damage. They are going to be exposed to more light because people will need light to see them. They are quite often in areas with a less controlled environment. They may be exposed to poorer quality materials for the display, as well as the display manner in which they are propped up or attached to supports can cause physical damage. And there's often an increase in security risk because they are accessible to the public. So you want to be very careful that you consider how you display and your items as well as the materials you're using in your displays. As far as possible, you want to take the same precautions you would for storage and the environment and minimize those degradation factors such as controlling your temperature, relative humidity, and light levels. Do we have any questions regarding the exhibits and storage?
Yes, there are several questions.
Yep.
In my personal collection, there are some old letters between two panes of glass, framed, unmounted, and unlit. Is it better to transfer them to an archival box and acid-free folder?
Can you repeat the type of materials it is?
There are old letters between two panes of glass.
I would say in general that might be better to put them in folders because the glass is incredibly heavy, so it's got to be an extra weight that can cause problems with your storage. There's also the problem because it's heavy that you may accidentally drop that item, and then the glass shards can damage your items. If they are going to be on display, you may temporarily want to have them between the glass so people can read both sides, but just for storage, I would say put them in folders.
Okay. We had a question asking if this webinar will be recorded. The answer is yes, it is being recorded. We will send a link to all of the participants as well as posting it on the Georgia Archives website and the Georgia Council for the Arts website. And another question, what are other materials that can be used as barriers in wooden storage shelves or drawers?
So any of those types of plastics that I mentioned, the polyethylene, polypropylene, and polyester are appropriate barriers. You could also use thick cardboard if it's good quality cardboard. You could use a sheet of acrylic. Another thing you can do is you can varnish those wooden items with water-based polyurethane varnish, which can act as a barrier layer. You want to make sure that you don't use oil-based polyurethane, however.
Okay, and one last question. Our museum has clothing exhibited on mannequins. Is there a time limit for this after which they become damaged, or is there another way to exhibit clothing?
Clothing can be very difficult because will be hanging, even though they'll be supported by the mannequin. There will be some hanging, and this can put strain on seams over time, especially for older clothing. So if they're not going to be on display, you want to make sure that you store them flat in good quality boxes so that there's not any strain on it. You want to make sure that as far as possible, the mannequin is supporting all aspects of that clothing, so it's not just going to be hanging. Depending on the type of materials that make up the clothing, you may have different considerations. I know that silk can degrade fairly quickly if it's in the wrong type of environment. We will be putting up some resources that you can then do some further research for specific types of materials, and I'll recommend that you look at some of those for advice on clothing and textiles.
Great, and those are all of the questions right now.
Okay, I'm going a little slow, so I'm going to have to speed up. I apologize if there's some issues with that. The next thing we're going to discuss is disasters. Disasters will be some of the worst things that can potentially happen to your collections. They can be large or small, such as flooding or just a small spill. They may be at an item level, such as a spill on an item, or over your entire region, and they can be natural, man-made, sudden, or predictable. Disasters can be unavoidable but mitigated against with good planning and preparation. And good preparation and a swift response are essential for minimizing damage. Some of these can be dealt with in-house if you've trained your staff appropriately. However, other times you will need to call in professional services. Common types of disasters are water damage, fire damage, theft, vandalism, data loss, and accidental damage. Fire damage often results in water damage because water is commonly used to put out fires. Disaster preparedness is cyclical. You will do your best to prepare for a disaster, and at some point you will have a disaster. I can promise you that. It may just be somebody knocking over a glass of water, but that will be a type of disaster. You will then respond to that disaster based on your preparedness, and you will then recover from it, meaning any repair to items or your building. And then you'll take what you've learned from that entire process and feed it back into your preparation so that you can try limit that type of disaster happening again in the future. So if you were to have a burst pipe, you may then want to go and have a survey of all your piping done to ensure that there may be no other pipes that will burst. The minimum requirements for your disaster planning and preparedness are to have a basic risk assessment. This can be where you just walk through your building and identify potential risks and hazards. You can also contact your local fire and police departments and have them walk through your building to assist with a risk assessment. You also want to make sure that you have an emergency call list, so if there is a disaster, you know who to contact. You want to have basic evacuation procedures if you need to evacuate your building, as well as basic fire and water response. The Council for State Archivists developed the Pocket Response Plan, and you can download the template off their website, and then you just fill in your institutional information, and on the back it will have a step-by-step guide on how to respond to basic disasters. So I'll recommend at a very minimum each of your institutions create your own prep plan. Fire can be one of the most damaging risks to your collections. As a conservator, I can fix water damage. However, if something's burnt up, it is gone. Therefore, fire prevention is the key. You want to eliminate fire hazards and maintain good fire prevention policies, such as unplugging heaters and kettles when they're not in use, and assessing your electrical equipment and electrical wiring. And you can also get the fire department in to advise on fire hazards and best practice. You want to practice biannual drills so your staff knows what to do in terms of evacuation. And you want to maintain your fire suppression systems and fire extinguishers, as well as perform annual fire extinguisher training with your staff so they know how to use them appropriately. Again, creating a close relationship with your fire department is very important for both your safety and theirs if they do need to respond to a disaster. And the last section I'm going to discuss today is integrated pest management. Integrated pest management is the prevention and control of pest infestations in a building and collections using a holistic approach. Quite often, traditional methods of eliminating pests with chemicals such as pesticides and toxic gas fumigation is not appropriate for collection materials or the buildings and locations where they are housed. These chemicals can damage your collection items. IPM is achieved through multi-pronged programs that address the various factors that allow for pest infestation as well as different types of pests. Preventing pest entry requires addressing the internal and external factors. This can be your building, which is the outermost protective barrier against pests. So you want to make sure that you have a well-sealed building, that your doors and windows close and are sealed appropriately, and that you check for any cracks or holes in the walls. You want to control the environment. Lucky for us, the environment that is appropriate for the longevity of your items also discourages pests. They don't like cold, dry environments. You want to watch for water sources. Water can both attract pests, as they would want to drink water to survive. However, they can also use water such as your drains as routes into your building. So you want to make sure that there's no standing water and that any drains are sealed or have a screen over them. You want to be careful with food sources as well. Unfortunately, in this case, most collection materials are food for pests, such as paper, leather, books. So you want to avoid other food sources that the staff and patrons may bring into the building, and take out your trash daily so that you don't accidentally attract pests. Housekeeping, I'll get into a little bit more detail shortly. You also want to be careful with your landscaping, that you don't have piles of debris that can nest for pests, as well as having branches that may hang over onto your building that rodents and pests can use to get access to your building. And you want to assess any incoming collections to make sure that there are no infestations in the boxes or folders that then may be introduced to your building. And you want to do this initial inspection in some place other than where your other collection materials are housed. Housekeeping is often the simplest, least expensive, and most impactful preservation activity. If you maintain proper cleaning and organization, you'll minimize potential nesting locations. You can minimize potential food sources by just dusting and clearing away dirt and debris and taking out your trash. Also, by maintaining good cleaning policies, you will allow for early detection of infestations. You especially want to keep an eye out for piles of dust, insect bodies, egg cases, live insects, and frass. If you do see any pest debris, you want to clean it immediately to remove additional food sources, as dead insects are food for other insects. You then want to clean the area to eliminate pheromone trails, which can attract other insects. And another nice thing about good housekeeping is that it can eliminate fire hazards, as well as catch maintenance issues early on. If you do spot an infestation, you first want to quarantine the area and clean it, as well as clean the collection materials. If necessary, you can use conventional pest control methods around the perimeter of your building to prevent more pests coming in. And you want to contact a pest control vendor that understands the specific requirements of cultural collections. You don't want to use toxic bait, pesticides, or fumigants in the building, especially as pests will then ingest the poison, and they may potentially move to another location and die. I've seen cases of mice rotting under floorboards, which is, I can tell you, is not fun. These residues can also affect the health of your staff and users. And I've put together some additional resources. Well, before I do that, do we have any questions regarding integrated pest management?
Yes, there is a question. Does quarantining incoming items mean that items for short-term exhibit need to be quarantined as well?
You don't have to quarantine incoming items as much as you need to make sure that you inspect them thoroughly, especially if they're going to be moved to areas with your collection materials. This is just, you want to make sure that there's no egg cases or live insects, and if there's any dead insect bodies, that may be an indication that there was a previous pest infestation, so you want to just keep an eye on that a bit more thoroughly.
Great, and that's all the questions right now.
I realize I didn't ask if there were any questions regarding disaster preparedness. Are there any questions on that topic?
No, not so far, but if you have a question, please go ahead and enter that in the box.
In the meantime, I have put together some additional resources, and as Henry said, we'll be sending this out. If you do have a disaster, you can contact the Georgia Archives at archives_disaster@usg.edu. There's also the Heritage Emergency Response Alliance, which is a disaster response organization for the state of Georgia, as well as the Savannah Emergency Response, which is for Savannah. The Georgia Archives also puts on workshops on preservation and conservation, and if you're interested in learning more about some of these topics or doing hands-on training for treatment, you can follow the Georgia Archives webpage or Facebook page to get additional information as that becomes available. And as I said earlier, if you want to do any research into specific materials, a good place to start is the American Institute for Conservation, and they have a very good resource page that will have lots of information about these topics, as well as specific information about specific types of materials. So, any last questions for either Henry or myself?
I don't see any last questions, so I will go ahead and wrap up. But if you do have a question, then we will get that in before we conclude. I want to thank Hendry and Sigourney so much for their generosity, their willingness to share their expertise. This was a really wonderful webinar. Also remind everybody that we hope when we're able to meet in person that we will be able to do some in-person seminars across the state where you can get some hands-on training. So we have your email addresses from registration, and we will let everybody know that those are coming up. If you have any thoughts on topics you'd like to see covered in the future, please pass those on to any of us. We would love to hear those. We will be sending the list of resources and the link to the recording to everybody who registered. So that will probably come out next week. So we have some very nice thank yous as comments, and we're glad that this was helpful today. So any last comments, Hendry or Sigourney, before we conclude?
I'd just like to thank everyone for attending for 2 hours. I know it's a long time to be in front of your computer, and we hope that we've been of some use to you and your collections. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you both. Thank you to everyone who participated. If you would like updates on other programs that Georgia Council for the Arts offers, please either sign up for our newsletter on our website under Contact Us or follow us on Facebook. And we look forward to seeing you very soon